Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the state of Ohio, its Senate race, and the polling data we're getting out of the state. So, in case you missed it, some new polls came out, and they are all pretty interesting to say the least. And so, in this video, for the first time, I'll be looking at polls in a specific state, which the first state, I guess, will be Ohio, specifically the Senate race, because the governor's race is not competitive at all. The Senate race, though, is going to be, at least a little interesting, even if not the most competitive, even if it's not the most competitive race. So I do think that it's worth talking with the polls here, because I think a lot of people understand what I'm going to say, and a lot of people might be decepted by these polls. A lot of people might not understand what these polls really mean, because they'll read a number, they'll read the top line number and say, well, wow, this is quite a good poll for the Democrats or for the Republicans. And so in this video, I'll be addressing what I mean when I say X poll equals Y. So yeah, we're just going to take a look at these polls. And so since the beginning, or since the end of May, we've seen 5 new polls, and they've all shown leads for the Democrat in this race, Tim Ryan. And so this is pretty significant, because this race was anticipated to be a pretty solid race for the Republicans. We did not expect to get a ton of polling here. We didn't really expect to, get much data, because the race was kind of marked off. Like, we don't get a ton of data about a state like Oklahoma or about Massachusetts, because these states aren't competitive and there aren't really things that are worth talking about. And in Ohio, I didn't really view this race to be a competitive Senate race at any point in time dating back to 2021. And I don't really rescind that. I still think that J.D. Vance has a big edge here, and so does Nate Silver. I think he only gives Tim Ryan about 1,700 chance. Actually, let's pull it up right now just to look at where he stands on this. And he has J.D. Vance favored. Here it's this seat is quite solid for the Republicans. Again, Tim Ryan does have a chance, but right now he does show an 8-point lead for J.D. Vance, and I think that this is pretty clearly reflected when you look at the data you're getting outside of the polls. When you look at the 2020 election in the state of Ohio, Donald Trump did win the state by around 8%. So if Vance were to win by 8%, it would be him running even with Donald Trump. So I think when you look at information that isn't replicated in polling data, it would be pretty solid for the Republicans and for J.D. Vance over Tim Ryan, despite the fact that Tim Ryan is, I think, a good candidate for this state. So let's go back to the polls. And so the first poll we got at the end of May, so it was conducted for a span of 4 days, I believe, May 30th, June 1st, June 2nd, June 3rd, so beginning of June, and it showed a lead for Tim Ryan of 3%. Although again, this poll is a Democratic-leaning pollster. Tim Ryan's campaign did another poll at the end of June, and it showed him beating J.D. Vance by 2%. Then on July 3rd, we got a poll from SurveyMonkey, which again I have a lot of serious questions for. They have Tim Ryan up by 9%. They did another poll, or they did 3 polls on the same day, and they showed a 9-point lead for Ryan, 2 9-point leads for Tim Ryan, and 1 12-point lead, which is pretty striking, to be honest with you, because you wouldn't expect a Democrat to be winning in a state that voted for Trump by 12 points, especially in a year that is considered to be more Republican, especially in a year that is a red wave year by some standards. And so when you look at the polls, they don't really reflect the sentiment of red wave, Ohio safe, Republican. And so one thing has to be wrong. Either the polls are right and the red wave Ohio thing is wrong, or the polls are wrong and Ohio is indeed going to be very red this year. And so I'm here to tell you that I think the polls are wrong. I'm stepping in front of the bus. There's been a lot of hype around these polls saying maybe this race is competitive. Maybe this race is a race that the Democrats could end up flipping, I guess sleeper flips. I've even seen predictions here on YouTube that have shown the Democrats winning this Senate race. And so, quite frankly, I don't really know if those predictions are based off any information other than the polls. And again, the polls aren't great. We're American. I think most of us are accustomed to not believing the polls. But specifically in 2020, the polls had a landslide for Joe Biden. Biden was supposed to be very, the polls showed races here in Ohio, in Iowa, in Texas, down to the wire. They had Biden ahead in Florida. They had Biden ahead in North Carolina. They had him winning the Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania by a lot more than he won it by. In 49 out of 50 states, the only outlier being Colorado for whatever reason, but in 49 out of 50 states, the vast majority, the polls underestimated Donald Trump and overestimated Joe Biden. We saw that in the Senate, too. The Senate Democrats were supposed to have a few more Senate seats than they actually won. They were supposed to have a lot more House seats than they won. The common trend here is the polls almost always underestimate the Democrats. Happened in 2020. In 2016, as we famously, I think this is the most famous instance of the polls being wrong. Clinton was ahead in all the states she won, well, minus Nevada. She was behind Nevada, but she won Nevada. But she was also ahead in the critical Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. She was supposed to be competitive in Florida, she was supposed to be better in Florida, be better in North Carolina, be competitive in Ohio and Iowa, and even Arizona. And she ended up losing all those states, some states like Ohio and Iowa, by pretty significant amounts. So, to be quite frank here, the polls have not, in the past 6 years, had a good track record. And sure, you can pull up instances where the polls were good. Like in 2021, in the Virginia governor's race, the polls were very good. They had Youngkin up by about 2% in the final aggregate here on 538. He won by that amount. So there is a chance the polls have fixed it. But when you get results like this that are just ludicrous, I don't really think you can make that argument very well unless you're telling me you really think Tim Ryan's going to win the Senate race by double digits, because that's what the polls are saying. Now, in fairness, I will pull up the aggregate here. So, Nate Silver, 538, they do a decent job of averaging these numbers out and adjusting for biases here. And they currently have a 2-point lead for Tim Ryan. He's at 44%. J.D. Vance just under 43. Ryan's at 44.5. J.D. Vance just under 43. But if you round up, it would be a lead of 45 to 43, which again, just under 2%. And as you can see here, the polling has always showed this to be a pretty competitive race. So originally, Tim Ryan had a lead of about 1 point because there was the first poll that came out was in August, I guess. Then on May 2nd, J.D. Vance took the lead for the first time. He was up by about a point. His lead actually increased to nearly 3% heading into June. Then Tim Ryan took a lead, kind of mirrored that, almost a 3-point lead for him, and now it's down to a 2-point lead because, again, this poll right here, the Ryan plus 2 poll that came out on July, or no, interestingly enough, I think they actually added in this later, even though they have an earlier field day. But anyways, the Ryan plus 2 poll that came out, I think, made the number go down from D plus 3 to D plus 2, and it's showing Tim Ryan favored. And so, where's the disparity? Well, the disparity is the polling aggregate shows this race to be a toss-up race, maybe tilting towards Democrats. But in the forecast, Tim Ryan is ahead, or Tim Ryan is losing, and pretty badly. He only has about a 16% chance of winning, and most of his victories are by very small, minuscule amounts. And that to me just says that Nate Silver, I think, understands that the polls aren't going to be great here. So why does he think this? Well, let's look at the 2020 election in Ohio and look at the polling data. So these are the polls. They started tracking back in March. Biden had about a 3.5-point lead. Then as we got into the summer, starting in May and June, it kind of narrowed up and it was like a dead heat for the entire month of May. It was, Biden narrowly ahead, Trump narrowly ahead. Then Biden expanded his lead as we headed into June after, obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement, the energy kind of shifted towards Democrats heading into the summer. And Biden maintained, a 2-3-point lead until kind of the last month of summer. August, Trump took a lead, and it was very back and forth right here. As you can see right here, it was very neck and neck for all of August. Starting in September, though, Trump did start to open up a lead. He kind of held that lead all the way until the end, until kind of around the time of the first presidential debate. Biden retook the lead. He led by about a point. Then it was neck and neck for most of October. Biden held the lead in early October. Trump kind of took it back in mid-October or late October. And then Trump's lead kind of, he kind of surged in a way. It was only by a couple points, but Trump did surge after the second debate, and he held, a lead of almost 2 points for a little over a week. Then on election day, we walked into election day with Trump having a lead of just 0.8%. So all this, I went through that, but all of those numbers should, reflect a very tight race, whether it's Biden plus 1 or Trump plus 1. That's a very competitive race that should have a very contested outcome. And ultimately, while Ohio was viewed to be competitive, if you take a look at the ratings and the predictions, a lot of people made predictions off the polls. They thought the polls would be right. Most people had it as toss-ups, about as crystal ball. They had it as lean Republican. I had it as lean Republican, but I thought it would be more competitive than it ended up being. And it was supposed to be, again, a very close race, and Donald Trump won by over 8%. It was not that close. It was, it wasn't terrible, but as you can see on this map, Trump did very well outside of the urban areas. This is Toledo. Biden won Toledo, won Cincinnati, won Dayton, won Columbus. He won Cleveland and Akron, and he won, this is where the diversity of Ohio is. But Trump did very well in the working class areas over here. He did well in the suburbs of Toledo, suburbs of Cincinnati, and Dayton. He also won Delaware County, which is a suburban county north of Columbus. So Trump did very well in most of Ohio, except for the pre-urban areas that came out for Joe Biden. But ultimately, Ohio did stay red. It stayed red about the same percent as 2016. Trump won by 8 in 2016. He won by 8 this time around too. So it did not really move that much to the Democrats, even though the polling suggested it was going to be a very close race. And so that's why I'm skeptical to trust the polls again. Now, I've talked about how I don't like SurveyMonkey because if you look at their polls in the past, I'll even show you their polls in 2020. They polled the state of Florida. The day before the election, they had Biden ahead by 2. They polled Pennsylvania, they had Biden up by 7 and 5. And they polled Iowa, and they had Trump up by 3 in this one poll. They even had Biden winning a poll in Iowa. They lost state by 8%. So SurveyMonkey had a consistent pattern of underestimating Biden all throughout 2020. And like if you just look at these final results, they showed races to be more competitive than they actually were in Republican areas, and they showed races to be less competitive than they actually were in Democratic areas. So evidently, not only is polling in Ohio usually quite bad, but SurveyMonkey specifically, the polls that's showing massive leads for Tim Ryan, is also not a good pollster. So I think when you look at these polls, you can read into them. I read all these polls. I read almost every poll that comes out unless it's like immediately terrible. And again, these polls were pretty bad. I didn't really give them too much thought, but I did read through them. And so in fairness, I know what these polls are saying, and they don't make sense. These polls, what happens is they call voters in Ohio, and they get what they deem to be an accurate sample. But Democrats, we know this for a fact, Democrats are more likely to pick up the phone to answer polls than Republicans. Republicans tend to be a kind of a thinner data group. Like Democrats are more diverse. They, maybe black voters in urban areas, white voters in suburban areas, working class voters in rural areas. Republicans are mostly just white voters who live all across the state. It's harder to poll Republican states than it is to poll Democratic states. That's why polls in states like Colorado, polls in states like California or Washington or Connecticut or Mass, like just Democratic states, generically, are easier to poll than swing states or Republican-leaning states. Because in Republican-leaning states, Republicans are less likely to pick up, and you get a higher sample of Democrats. And so in Ohio, which is a right, it's kind of a swing state, but it's definitely leaning towards the Republicans. The polls there are not good, and so that's what I'm telling you. You guys need to be very cautious when you make these predictions. I'd be surprised if anyone can make a case for Tim Ryan winning without showing these polls that I just don't deem to be very, they're legitimate, but I don't deem them to be very reliable. It's not a good sense of information because if you're going off these polls in 2020, you would have been very wrong. So that's it for this video, guys. Just learn the lessons of 2020. Don't trust these terrible state polls. Don't trust these polls that just don't conform to basic logic. Use your sentence. Like, you guys are smart. I know you can figure it out. Tim Ryan up by double digits in a state that even, Nate Silver is a little more generous to Democrats in the past. He pushes Democrats down the state. You guys gotta, just think about this. Use your senses. Let the instincts kick in. I think you'll get to the same conclusion that I got to, because I think these polls are bad. I think you'll think these polls are bad too once you look into them and what they're saying. So that's it for this video, guys. Don't get clickbaited into looking at bad polls. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for the bad polls. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next video. Bye, guys.